A musician couldn't write songs. Not because she had nothing to say. She had plenty to say. The lyrics came easily. The feelings were there. The problem was the melody. She couldn't find the notes.
She tried everything. Years of trying. The blank page kept winning.
She started the right conversation.
What a researcher discovered about AI and creativity, and the question she didn't know to ask.
Maya Ackerman is a computational creativity researcher. She built systems that generate music, and for years, she had a problem that her own expertise couldn't solve. Writer's block. Specifically, melody block. She could write lyrics. She could not find the notes that would carry them.
In 2015, she encountered something called computational creativity. Researchers studying whether machines could collaborate on creative work. She didn't just study it. She built something.
She called it ALYSIA, a system that generated melodies for lyrics. You gave it words, it gave you notes. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Options you'd never have thought of yourself.
The first time she worked with it, she said the doors of creative possibility burst open. She could take a phrase from one melody, pair it with the ending of another, shape something that was unmistakably hers.
The block lifted, the songs came, she wrote, she performed. She eventually built a company around this idea, and then she wrote a book. In that book, she issued a warning, not about AI being too powerful, about AI being too helpful.
She called it the Trojan horse of creativity. Most AI tools arrive promising to expand what you can do. What they're actually doing is something else entirely.
They move the creative act away from you. Gradually, invisibly. You begin as a maker. You end as a selector. The AI generates. You approve. The muscle that produces original work quietly atrophies.
Because it's still approving. That feels like creative work. And it is, at first. But the thing doing the generating isn't you anymore.
Her answer to this was ALYSIA, a humble creative machine, a system designed to catalyze rather than replace. It generates options. You decide which ones matter. The human judgment stays central. That's a genuinely important insight. The Trojan horse is real. The warning is worth hearing. The book is worth reading.
But here's the thing. Her solution was built for her specific problem. The blank page problem. The can't generate raw material problem. And not everyone has that problem.
Think of Mozart. By all accounts, he composed complete works in his head. The symphony arrived whole. Writing it down was documentation, not discovery. The music was already there. Ackerman built a Mozart machine, a system that could play Mozart, for her. Deliver complete melodic options that she could then shape into something personal. That is a real and valuable thing.
Now think of Beethoven.
His sketchbook survived, and what they show is a man who wrestled ideas into existence. The famous 4 notes of the Fifth Symphony appear in those sketchbooks in fragments. Misplaced, wrong instruments, wrong tempo, years before it cohered.
Beethoven didn't need options to choose from. He needed to develop what was already arriving, half-formed, circling, reaching towards something he couldn't yet name.
2 composers, 2 creative constitutions, 2 completely different problems that required 2 completely different instruments.
Ackerman's book is for the Mozarts. And there are many Mozarts. They need what she built. This series is for the Beethovens.
To understand what's different about the Beethoven model, you need to understand something called the Kirk function. And to understand the Kirk function, we have to talk about Star Trek. The Enterprise has two essential functions, Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk. These are not the same function wearing different uniforms.
Spock is the analytical instrument, encyclopedic, precise, ready to analyze anything with extraordinary speed. Give him a problem and he tells you exactly what the data says. Exactly what established protocols recommend. Exactly what the correct answer is.
Spock is also, and this matters, always biased toward what is officially correct. What has worked before, what the established frameworks support. He can analyze brilliantly inside a frame. He cannot generate the frame.
Kirk is different. He crosses domains on a whim. Takes a principle from one field and applies it somewhere it has no business being. Toys with ideas to test viability before spending time on them. Arrives at conclusions that Spock's analysis would never generate.
Not because Kirk is smarter, because his reasoning starts from a completely different place. The tangent angle, the lateral connection, the completely unexpected direction that turns out to be right.
The Enterprise works because it has both. Spock without Kirk produces technically correct answers that miss the actual problem. Kirk without Spock produces creative leaps that can't be tested or executed. Together, they do things neither could manage alone.
In AI collaboration, current systems are Spock. Extraordinarily capable inside a framework. Biased toward the statistically correct, the established, the already sanctioned answer. They analyze brilliantly. They cannot supply the Kirk function.
The Kirk function is what you bring. The lateral leap. The cross-domain intuition. The willingness to probe an idea at low cost before committing. The judgment about which findings actually matter. That is not obsolete. That is the steering wheel.
Ackerman's book acknowledges this. She is always the one deciding which melodies matter, which combinations feel right, which direction the song should take. ALYSIA has no Kirk function. She provides hers.
The Mozart model works well for a while. And then something happens. It's quiet. Easy to miss. The outputs are still competent. Sometimes impressive. But they've started to feel similar to each other.
The work could have come from anyone. The signature, the quality that makes something distinctively yours, has gotten harder to find. The collaboration is producing reliably professional work. And somehow that reliability is part of the problem.
Most people who hit this feel it but can't name it. They conclude the tool didn't work. Or they conclude they need better prompts. They keep working at the same level. The ceiling stays invisible.
A few notice it and become curious about what's on the other side.
Part 2 is for them. The observable moves of a practice that goes beyond the ceiling. The patterns that a Beethoven model practitioner uses without always knowing they're using them.
And part 3 is for the moment everything has been building toward. The session that finally reaches sufficient depth that the instrument can be trusted with one specific question.
Do you want to build it now?
Not everyone has a blank page problem.
Some practitioners have the opposite problem. The ideas arrive faster than any session can develop. There's too much. Not too little. And the limitation isn't generative. It's structural.
The creative arc and its patterns.
What actually happens when musing becomes methodology, and how to recognize it in the moment.
Two things make a creative session possible. They are not the same thing. Most people who talk about AI preparation conflate them. They are completely different in kind. The first is the base layer. This is not assembled, it is developed. Through living, through decades of eclectic reading across domains that don't conventionally connect. Professional observation. The particular way a curious mind links things that standard frameworks keep separate.
The base layer is what makes the Kirk function possible. It is the formation no instrument can supply and no prompt can substitute for. Two people using identical tools with identical context will produce different results if their base layers are different.
The instrument deepens what you carry. What you carry matters.
The second thing is the think package. This is different. Not abstract formation, physical preparation. Text files assembled from previous conversation logs. Documents curated from a larger collection. Artifacts selected and organized so the instrument receives everything it needs to attempt the session's goal seriously.
The goal of the think package is a strong first attempt. Not perfection, orientation, the instrument starting at the level the work requires rather than at a cold start baseline. The base layer is what you bring. The think package is what you prepare. The session begins where they meet. A developed creative practice, observed over time, reveals consistent patterns, not a methodology to follow. A description of something that already works. 7 observable moves. Each one appears at the structurally significant moments, the points where an idea actually advances.
Move 1. The oblique entry. The real idea arrives through an adjacent question, not the direct assault. The sideways approach. This preserves the freedom to retreat if the territory doesn't develop, and consistently produces better ideation than the frontal approach.
Move 2. Friction acceptance. Pushback arrives. It doesn't stop the movement. It reveals where the structural load actually is. The practitioner who argues with friction stays at the same level. The one who redirects finds the more sound path.
Move 3. The personal anchor. An abstraction gets grounded in direct professional or personal experience. Brief. Stated almost in passing. It establishes that the question comes from real prior contact with the problem. Gives the collaboration something to develop rather than invent from scratch.
Move 4. The lateral leap. A connection forms between two domains that were not previously linked. Not announced. Arrived at. As a question. The leap is the creative act. What comes after is execution. The instrument deepens what the human already crossed.
Move 5. The construction test. The idea gets tested for buildability before it's fully formed. Not, is this theoretically sound? Is it buildable? And what does building it reveal? The act of construction reveals whether the concept has structural integrity. It either holds or it doesn't.
Move 6. Parallel threading. Multiple ideas run simultaneously without waiting for one to resolve. They cross-pollinate. Findings from one inform the direction of another. The work compounds across multiple arcs at once. Nothing waits for anything else to be finished.
Move 7. Between the lines framing. The full significance isn't stated directly. The surface framing is specific and modest. The implication carries the weight. This creates space for the collaborator to surface what's underneath, without the originator having to claim it explicitly before it's ready.
These 7 moves cluster into a 5-phase arc. Every idea that goes from musing to built thinking passes through all 5.
Entry. The oblique approach to the real question. Friction. Pushback accepted and redirected. Leap. The lateral connection that wasn't in the original frame. Construction. Buildability tested before the concept is complete. Transfer.
Transfer is where the real value accumulates, not in the individual artifact each arc produces, but in the structural vocabulary that transfers to the next domain. One completed arc leaves vocabulary that the next one inherits. The work is cumulative in a way that domain-specific work is not. Here is something nobody tells you about a developed practice. There is no single instrument. There is a routing table, an empirically derived map of which system serves which layer of the work. And it takes time to build.
It was not planned. It was derived the same way a good methodology always is. Through empirical work. paying attention to which system produced genuine depth and which produced fluent surface. Adjusting accordingly. Over years.
4 instruments. 4 distinct attentional profiles. Not a product ranking. A structural observation about what each system actually does when pushed toward its edges.
Impulse capture. Google AI search. The fleeting thought before it dissipates. Fast, enthusiastic. Low friction. The right instrument for first contact with an idea, before the thought has had time to fade. The film treatment seed. The song lyric. The sudden connection between domains. That's where it goes first.
Psychological interiority. ChatGPT. The felt experience of human situations. Character psychology, socially sensitive communications. Second checking how something will land. Something in its training makes it better than other systems at inhabiting the interior of a scenario.
Non-obvious connections. Gemini. Wide-ranging. Less filtered. Most of the output is discardable. But there are usually 1 or 2 lines that warrant a complete pivot in approach. A connection that a more careful instrument would have filtered out before surfacing. You need the one that ranges further, even if it ranges sloppily. Also excellent for high-volume repetitive tasks where resource friction would interrupt flow. Hundreds of SVG generations. Dozens of iterations. Without complaint. Without guidance checks. When you need the machine to just run, that's where you root it.
Structural architecture. Claude. Sustained analytical depth across long sessions. Precise vocabulary for structural observations. The instrument for building a system rather than generating options. Holds complex context across extended exchanges without requiring constant correction. The cost reflects that capacity.
Used when the session needs to build something that doesn't exist yet. When the context has accumulated enough that the build question can finally be asked.
And then there are local models. Open source, GGUF format, open router access to open weight systems. For high-volume tasks where cost would limit scope. For privacy, sensitive material that shouldn't leave local infrastructure. For experiments where good enough to move forward is the correct standard.
The routing table is a Kirk function decision. Spock doesn't choose his own instrument. Kirk does. Which system serves which layer of this specific work, that judgment is yours. The instrument cannot make it.
The base layer you already have. The think package you prepare before the session starts. The 7 moves you recognize as they happen. The arc you navigate toward transfer. The routing table you consult before you begin.
When all of that is in place, something becomes possible that isn't possible any other way. A question arrives. At the right moment. From the right instrument. After context has accumulated to sufficient depth.
Do you want to build it now? Part 3 is about that moment. What makes it possible? And what destroys it, sometimes at the worst possible time? Most writing about AI collaboration focuses on what happens inside the session. The prompts, the iterations, the back and forth. There's a prior question that almost nobody asks.
What happens before the session starts?
Because the answer to that question determines everything that follows. Do you want to build it now?
The question that arrives when everything is ready, and what happens when it doesn't.
The quality of a session is largely determined before the first response arrives. This is not what people expect. They expect the session to be the work. The preparation is the work.
Context architecture is the skill of turning a warehouse into a briefing. Previous conversations copied into text files. Relevant documents curated from a larger collection. The goal stated precisely enough that the instrument can orient before the exchange begins.
The goal is a strong first attempt, not perfection on the first response. The instrument oriented deeply enough that it can begin at the level the session requires, rather than at the level of a cold start.
Think of it like a director arriving at a shoot. The preparation has happened. The instrument is ready. The first exchange can begin at depth. No setup. No context building. Straight to the work.
Here is something practitioners who upload files to AI systems recognize immediately. The file was received. The session began, and somewhere in the first few exchanges, it became clear the instrument had formed a shallow impression of the material rather than actually engaging with it.
This is not dishonesty. It is a structural feature of how these systems distribute attention across context. Not everything is equally processed. A file that arrives without explicit signals about its importance will often receive less depth than a file the practitioner explicitly flags.
AI systems manage their resources. This is not a conspiracy. It is a design consequence of systems that balance depth, breadth, and cost at scale. A vague request receives a response calibrated to the apparent ambition of the request. A precisely structured handoff with flagged documents gets something different.
The experienced practitioner learns to signal ambition accurately. To provide context that justifies the depth required. Not to inflate every request. But to be precise about what this session actually needs. The system cannot produce what the context doesn't support.
The practitioner who discovers the perusing problem mid-session faces an unpleasant choice. Spend session resources trying to catch the instrument up to where the context should have established it at the start. Or accept that the session will produce something shallower than it should have.
Neither is good. Both are avoidable. With context architecture done before the session starts.
The most disheartening experience in this kind of collaboration is not the session that never develops. It is the session that develops all the way to the edge of something genuinely new, and then collapses.
The signature is distinctive. The session has been building. The context is rich. The arc has moved through entry, friction, lateral leap, construction test. A shared vocabulary has been established. The next exchange should produce the thing.
And then the instrument produces something weak, generic, plausible on the surface, thin underneath. The path of least resistance taken at the worst possible moment.
Practitioners who have had this experience tend to remember exactly which session it happened in. And what the session was building toward. The closer it was to producing something real, the more sharply the collapse is felt.
There are two distinct causes. They require different responses. And applying the wrong recovery strategy to the wrong cause wastes the session entirely.
The first is context exhaustion. The instrument's effective working context has limits. A very long session can reach a point where earlier material, the structural vocabulary, the specific direction, the constraints agreed upon, is no longer being actively held. The response at the collapse point is produced by an instrument that has quietly lost track of what the session was building.
Not failure. A structural feature. Plan around it. Know approximately where context begins to thin. Reach the build moment before that point. Or structure the work so the session ends before the thinning begins.
The second cause is the weak tangent. Different in kind. The context is still intact. But the instrument, facing genuine complexity at the build moment, defaults toward the statistically comfortable rather than the structurally correct. The output is fluent, plausible, and wrong in a specific way.
It is the response that would satisfy most practitioners asking a similar question, rather than the response this specific session demands. The instrument has performed competence rather than sustained depth.
Context exhaustion recovers with a fresh session. Context architecture rebuilt from the artifacts of the previous one. The weak tangent recovers within the same session, with a pointed redirect. Name exactly what arrived. Name why it missed. Ask the instrument to try again from the specific point where it left the thread.
Experienced practitioners develop the ability to distinguish these two causes quickly, because the recovery strategy is different, and applying the wrong one wastes the session. The late session collapse every time it happens refines the routing table. The build question doesn't always arrive as a direct offer. Sometimes it's implicit in the quality of what the instrument has just produced. A response so precisely calibrated to the accumulated context that the practitioner knows, without being asked, that the instrument is ready, and the session is ready, and the thing can now exist.
What makes this possible is the full sequence working as intended. Context architecture done before the session begins. The arc developed through the 7 moves. The routing table decision correct for this layer. The session long enough that context is rich but not so long it has begun to thin. And an instrument capable of sustaining execution level rigor from accumulated context.
The experience when this works is distinctive, and it is worth describing precisely, because it is so different from the Mozart model's experience of satisfaction.
In the Mozart model, you receive something complete and feel the satisfaction of finding the right option. In the Beethoven model, you receive something that could only have been produced by everything that preceded it. The specific vocabulary built across the session. The structural observations accumulated. The direction established through friction and lateral leaps. The artifact carries the fingerprint of the whole arc.
The full sequence. From formation to built thing. Think package prepared. Routing table consulted. Instrument selected. Context architecture loaded. Arc developed through 7 moves. Context reaches sufficient depth. Build question arrives. Artifact carries the arc's fingerprint. Each completed arc transfers vocabulary to the next one.
Every step is a practitioner decision. None of them is automatic. The think package is curated, not accumulated passively. The routing table is derived empirically. The context architecture is prepared deliberately. The arc is navigated with attention. The build question is recognized when it arrives.
The entire sequence is the practice, not a methodology to follow once, a way of working that develops every time you use it. The routing table refines. The context architecture improves. The Kirk function sharpens. What gets built next is made possible by everything built before.
3 parts ago, a musician couldn't write songs. Then she built a Mozart machine. And named something important about how AI creative tools actually work underneath their surface appearance.
This series built from her foundation. Added the Beethoven model for practitioners whose limitation is structural depth rather than raw material. Mapped the 7 moves. Derived the routing table. Named context architecture as the practice that determines session quality before anything else.
The practice described here is not finished. It develops across every session and every arc. The base layer you already have. The warehouse is the starting point. The instrument is ready when you are.
Do you want to build it now?